morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina McHale, and thank you for participating in today's 308th Justice Clearinghouse webinar. During today's webinar, Jamey and Justin Watt are here to talk about moral courage and ethical lessons learned from Iraq's most notorious war crime. What makes one person speak for justice when others stay silent? What happens when accusations lack evidence and a life hangs in the balance? During today's webinar, we'll hear from Justin Watt, the veteran who reported his fellow soldiers' crimes of rape and murder in Iraq's Triangle of Death. We will explore the moral weight of speaking up for justice, the ethical codes professionals live by, the reasons to stay silent, how ethical actions are a daily discipline. We will also understand how tireless efforts by law enforcement professionals brought justice and averted tragedy. Together, we'll discover how Justin's courage equips each of us to do the right thing, no matter the cost. Our speakers today are Jamey and Justin Watt. Jamey is the principal of Outsider Consulting and serves leaders and professionals across the nation. He has learned much from his successes as well as his failures. After graduating from West Point as an infantry officer, Jamey led in combat in Afghanistan and in Iraq. In Iraq, he negotiated with tribal leaders, coordinated with Iraqi army counterparts, and oversaw the establishment of police stations and local governance. Following Army service, Jamey began a career as a leadership consultant. He worked closely with the Center of Army Profession and Ethic as it prompted leaders to grapple with identity, ethical decision-making, and culture. Jamey oversaw design and use of various instructional methods, including production of the video case series and a modular documentary on war crime. Jamey specializes in workplace personality assessments, facilitation of complex conversations, and building strong leadership teams. He has worked with law enforcement officers, corporate executives, senior military leaders, small business owners, emerging leaders, and entire business units. Justin Watt is an entrepreneur and a small business owner in Tucson, Arizona. His business ventures have included tactical training for law enforcement officers and marketing services for corporations. Justin is also a veteran of the Army's 101st Airborne Division and served in Iraq. In March of 2006, soldiers from Justin's unit committed the war crimes that would eventually be described in the book Black Hearts, One Platoon's Descent into Madness in Iraq's Triangle of Death. Justin is a soldier who found out about and ultimately reported those crimes. And now briefly before we begin, I'd like to share with you some information about the Justice Clearinghouse. The Justice Clearinghouse is the only peer-to-peer educational program for justice professionals that emphasizes the multidisciplinary nature of an effective justice system. Through our year-round virtual conference, our audience and subscribers begin to develop a comprehensive understanding of the justice system while breaking down the many misconceptions that plague many systems. While our events are free to attend live, our subscribers receive 24/7 access to recorded webinars and are eligible to receive certificates of attendance that can be used when seeking continuing education credits. If you're not presently a subscriber, I would invite you to join today and support our work. And the last thing I want to address with everybody are some basic housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded, and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes and will be available to subscribers on the Justice Clearinghouse website shortly after the show. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you can type as many questions as you have in the GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll take as many of your questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Next, if you experience audio issues during the webinar today, such as the audio cutting in and out intermittently, you can simply use the telephone number included in your email invite. After dialing in, when the system asks you for a PIN, you can simply bypass that by hitting the pound key. And last, we do have a follow-up survey at the end of the webinar, and we do ask that you complete it. Your feedback helps. And with that, let's turn our presentation over to our instructor for the day. Jamey, Justin, it's all yours.
Hey, Chris, thanks a lot. We appreciate you having us here. I will say that one of my most meaningful work experiences, it was bringing Justin's story to life for many military leaders, and we've had a chance to work together over the years, and a friendship has resulted. And so I know for myself, very excited to be here today, sharing some of the lessons learned here with this audience. And Justin, I want to say on behalf of myself and all listening, thank you. Thank you for being so willing to share some of the worst moments of your life with the rest of us so that all of us can learn and grow as a result. I know it's many times a weight to carry, so thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
A couple of notes up front for our viewers, and this is just as a heads up, given that most of our audience is in the justice profession, some of the content may be a little bit grittier than it would be with other audience. And so I just want to remind viewers of that, that the events that we're listening to, first off, they occurred in a war zone, and the crimes are rape and murder, mass murder at that. So just to keep that in mind for all who are viewing and any who you might be inviting to view. Another note is we're ready for this to be a highly interactive interview. We had several folks who responded to the initial survey to submit some questions that were of interest to them. And as we progress through the session, I want to invite everybody to use the questions tab to just start posting questions in real time, and then we'll work to answer as many of them as we can as we work through. And you can start that right now. I know some of you are probably coming in with questions up front. So with that, I want to briefly review the background for this story. I know that many of you have had a chance to watch the introduction video that we shared, and thanks again to our friends at Previous Group for being able to use that. But for others who maybe it's been a while since you've read the story or less familiar, just want to cover some of the key elements and then get into some questions directly for Justin. In a little over a month, we will be 13 years since the crimes that are at the center of this story. In March of 2006, 4 soldiers from the United States Army conspired to rape a teenage girl and murder her and her family. 2 other soldiers, in a sense, were lookouts for these crimes. The crimes are vicious, and sitting here on an afternoon at our comfortable computers, it's important to remember the context. This happened in the middle of a bloody deployment, where Justin and his fellow soldiers had been in multiple engagements with the enemy and had lost many friends, killed or severely wounded. The unit Justin was a part of was responsible for a number of outposts and traffic control points in their sector. As casualties mounted, some of those were run by just a handful of soldiers, often with a relatively junior soldier in charge. Near one of those checkpoints lived a teenage girl with her family. Several soldiers decided to rape her and to kill her and her family. They tried to look like insurgents while they did it, trading out their uniforms and weapons for those that looked like insurgents. They raped the girl and slaughtered all eyewitnesses. Other than the 2 lookouts, no one except the 4 soldiers knew, at least at first. The crime went undetected for weeks, and then at one of those checkpoints manned by different soldiers, it was overrun, and American soldiers went missing in action to be tortured and killed. In the aftermath of that incident, Justin first heard of the crimes from one of his sergeants, and he was faced with the decision of whether or not to further investigate, and then multiple decisions after that. It's no secret at this point that he did decide to report the crimes, and our interview today will talk about some of the details of that decision and the process that followed. Again, Justin, thanks for making time today. I want to go back to just this whole idea of going to war, and I know for many who have not done it, it remains a bit of a mystery, this thing that's thankfully often overseas and kind of separated from, say, the rest of us in society. And so I want to ask, like, how would you tell somebody, what is it like to go to war?
I would say, for one, I mean, I'm sure that there's probably vast number of veterans that are in the audience. So definitely thanks for their service. And I think that as unique as kind of the jobs are, for the people that we're talking to, the deployment experiences vary just as significantly. I mean, for me, I signed up for the infantry, and so it was my objective to go and be on the ground. And if there was fighting to do, I wanted to do that. If there was aid to pass out, I wanted to do that. I can say that it's there's nothing, much like joining the Army or I think joining the police force, where you have an idea of what it's like, you don't know until you actually have to do that job. And so when I went overseas, you're going with a bunch of people, who are really like your family, but ultimately you have to make that journey alone too. And it's a completely different paradigm than you're used to. I mean, I remember like some of the first gunfights that we got in, there would be routinely newer soldiers that would be like, you know, we're getting shot at, and they would be like, can we shoot back? And that's just that shows you how shocking real violence can be. And you know, you have to adapt to that. You have to adapt to like a totally different way of living and way of thinking about, you know, everything from how you walk down a road to what you're paying attention to. I think that there's a lot of paradigms between that and law enforcement. You know, from just kind of how you look at the world after you do that job. But yeah, when we got there, it was super austere. I mean, it was the way that I imagined war would be in the movies, and you know, you wonder how it's gonna be if you're gonna be the one who goes to that sector, because you don't choose. You know, you don't choose where you go. And when I got there, I mean, it was like welcome to Iraq really quickly. I mean, I think the first day that we got there, we got attacked by mortars. Took out our we had a trailer that had phones and a few computers for internet, and those were gone immediately. I was part of the first element to go out to the JSB, which is like a little patrol base that we were also in charge of. On the way out there, we hit an IED. So like my first time outside the wire, I hit an IED. And then shortly after that, you know, I was in my first gunfight. So they set the tone really quickly. This was going to be a kinetic deployment. We were going to be fighting like every day, and that's just how we lived. So it was definitely something that we had to adjust to. It was pretty shocking.
Thanks, Justin. And I know this next question is obviously very, very personal for you, but if you would share with the viewers about the day that you lost your best friend during that deployment.
So before we deployed, my roommate was Tyler McKenzie. He's a really good guy. He was, I mean, like 6'7", but he was a Mormon guy, like just, you know, like the nicest guy you've ever met. And it was nice to have somebody like that, because like the infantry is a hard place, especially like when you're new, because everyone's trying to, you know, figure out what you're made of, and so you really kind of have to earn your spot there. And it was always nice to be able to, you know, whenever the day was done, to go back and have somebody that wasn't really interested in playing those kind of games, even though he was kind of senior to me. We got to Iraq together, and he got plucked out for the battalion commander's PSD because they were looking for people that were huge, physically intimidating people. And that was, you know, the separation moment. So he got pulled out. He went to the personal security detail for the battalion commander, and I didn't see him for probably about 35 days. Right when I got into sector, my first rotation was to go to the JSB, which is, as I said, a patrol base. And it was, I mean, if where I was austere, the JSB was even worse. I mean, there was no running water, no electricity, there was no showers, there was no means to cook food. Like we ended up making a grill out of a sewer grate, and you know, we would burn wood underneath it, and then we would get you know, various food items on the economy, and it would be like, okay, you get some beef patties, and you know, they would cook it on the sewer grate, and then you would take it in your hands and then you would eat them. It was pretty wild, but we had been out there for like, I want to say about 25 days. And, you know, already been in contact a bunch, and you're going through like a personal adjustment period where not only are you alone, I mean, keep in mind, you know, I was like 22, 23. This is like the first time I'd really kind of been out on my own, and almost immediately after joining the Army, I deployed. So, I mean, it was just extremes that I hadn't really dealt with. You know, I was missing home. I was really scared at that point in time. I mean, it's just to see the pace of how things were moving. And it was like a struggle, you know, but I remember we were only supposed to be out there for like a week, and then that turned into 2 weeks and 3 weeks and no shower. And I was, you know, I mean, filthy, like totally different skin color. I mean, it was filling sandbags all day, fortifying, just hard manual labor. And then we got word that the battalion commander was coming out, which means that I would get to see Tyler. And when he got down there, he had brought me American cigarettes and beef jerky and toothpaste and deodorant, and it was awesome. I was playing a game of poker for cigarettes, like when he rolled up, and it was just awesome to see him. And I gave him a hug, and he gave me these gifts, and I was just like, man. He's like, how are you doing? And I was like, man. Well, and then he told me I smelled really bad. But he was like, how are you doing? And I was just like, man, this is hard. Like this area is really bad. And he was like, listen, man, have you been able to talk to your parents at all yet? And I was like, no, like we don't have a phone. Like I haven't been able to talk to them since I got into country. And he's like, write him a letter, and I'll call him tonight. We had spent time with each other's families before we went on the deployment, and so he knew him, and so I wrote my parents hastily just a quick letter, just letting them know I was okay, and like immediately I felt better, like I felt lighter, even though I wasn't making that connection. I don't know, I felt closer to home, I guess. I don't know how to explain it, but then it was time for them to leave, and I gave him a hug, and he banged his head getting into the turret because he was so huge, and he got in, and he drove out the gate, and I sat back down at the poker table that we had built out of MRE boxes, and about 2 to 3 minutes later, I heard the explosion that killed him, and that was like my message home went with him. It was just in his vest, and it took him about 12 hours to find his body. They had hit a 500-pound bomb that had been buried. It was a command detonated IED. I think three soldiers were killed in that blast, and one was severely wounded. And that was really the start to my deployment. That was the first guy. We had already taken casualties as a company, but that was the first guy that was really close to me that we lost. So that was my welcome to Iraq moment.
And Justin, what at that moment in time, and as you process that, already going into a difficult deployment, what did that do to your soul at that point in time to lose your friend that way, that suddenly, just like that?
It's you go through a lot of emotions. There's rage. And there's also he was like the best guy that I knew, you know what I mean? Like he was probably 2 times, 3 times the human being that I was. And, to learn that lesson that doesn't matter in war, like that quickly. It's just, the things that keep you alive aren't how good of a person you are, or, even how good you are at your job. Sometimes it's the, what seat in the Humvee are you sitting in? What order is the vehicle in? What patrol did you get tasked with? What shift of guard did someone assign you to? Like those are the things that separate us from life and death. A pebble in the ground under the base plate, of a mortar system. And so that the first one, I don't mean to make it sound trite, but the first one always hurts the most. And that it changed the way that I looked at things in a pretty profound way. And I had to make a few conscious decisions. It's like, because everyone wants to go out there and burn the world down, like after something like that happens, and you've got to really who am I and what am I here to do? And you have to accept that, this is what I signed up for. This is what he signed up for. And, really just try hard to be a professional.
Thanks, Justin. In a bit, I want to hear more, and I think our viewers want to hear just about the moment that you found out about this. But first, I want to ask it may seem almost like a too basic question, but and we were talking, you and I were talking about this the other day, of just how the more that a person looks into this story, in my opinion, the more complex it becomes. And what I mean by that is, if you just read a 2 or 3 sentence headline of this story, like war crimes committed soldier makes decision to turn in the guys that did it. Or if that's all I read, then there almost seems to be no tension to it, or, well, of course that's what you would do. That's not even a dilemma, right? Or that's not even a moral dilemma or an ethical dilemma. That the simplest version of this story, it seems kind of unremarkable to make a decision to put people in. But the more that we start to overlay the realities, the context, the complexity of that decision, while there still may be a clear highest and best moral action, the difficulty of taking that becomes greater and greater, and the odds of any one person making that right chance become less and less. And so in terms of painting that picture for viewers, I wonder if you can talk about, just given what that environment was, given who your comrades were, the soldiers to the left and right, given all of these factors, what would be a compelling reason for someone not to do something about this or not to investigate it further?
It's times like this that I'm thankful we're talking to justice people, because I think that profession has got a lot of dynamics that are similar in regards to, it's not just a job, I mean, like there's there's obviously there's a wide variety of people here. It's not everyone is out there, with a gun on their hip, walking a beat, or, going after, people in the cartel, or, whatever. But I think that people feel like they're connected to each other, and I feel like they're connected to the institution. And so when you go through some of these experiences, and I think that the law enforcement agents, like specifically the ones that are out walking around, dealing with the stuff on a daily basis, even district attorneys that, are dealing with dangerous people, and their staffs, you form tight bonds, because you put yourselves at risk together, and it's like, these are guys that I loved. I mean, this was before I got pulled out to become the RTO for the platoon. I was in their squad. I mean, these are guys that, had my back in gunfight after gunfight after gunfight. And, it's almost closer than family, because with family, you think that person's going to be there for me, but more often than not, it doesn't get tested. Here, in this circumstance, it's tested. It's tested all the time. And so you have like these really close bonds. There's loyalty to each other that gets in the way. There's the addition, to that. Like, I was a very junior member of the institution. And so you're going against people that outrank you significantly, that have an unbelievable amount of power over you. Everyone is scared. I think can understand being scared of losing your life. I mean, these are trained killers, and like, when the stakes are as high as you deal with injustice or in the military, turning those people in, what if it goes wrong? Like, what if they're able to get to me before I get questions? What if they find out that I've reported it? We're out in the middle of nowhere in the triangle of death, and we're losing people left and right. Like, if they killed me on a patrol, who's gonna think anything of it? I was really scared about retribution. I was scared about them trying to kill me to stop the process. I think that, I mean, even on a more superficial level, losing your career is really significant. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, I think, why people ultimately wrestle with decisions like that. And even more than that, it's like, being called, or not even more than that, but that label of like being a snitch or a rat, or whatever it may be. In a profession where you need each other, being alone is not a good place to be.
If you would relate to the viewers just exactly how you found out, and even walk through just some of the context for that, of that moment when you first heard that this was a possibility, and maybe talk through some of that too, because it can be easy to assume that, boom, instantly you knew this all at once, right? That this was knowledge. But as I've heard you tell it, there was a significant amount of doubt in terms of evidence and in terms of knowing for sure. So just if you would talk about that conversation with Uribe and just how that went down.
Yeah, so it was a completely random series of events. I just remember the platoon sergeant came up to me and was like, "Hey, you've got dental." Which is, just like absurd. Like you're in a combat zone and they're like, "Hey, you got your dentist appointment," but like stuff like that happens, and no one gets in the way of dental in the military. So they're like, "You've got to go. It's not optional. Like you're on the next bird out to Mahmudiya so you could get up to Stryker in Baghdad and go see the dentist." So it's like, okay. And then there's a couple other guys. Uribe had to go, who was my old team leader and ultimately the guy who ended up covering these crimes up after he himself found out about them. And we left on the bird, and he was my old team leader. We had a good relationship. We were some of the only guys from the original, first platoon at that point in the deployment. Like we had survived everything. He was going up because he had a hernia from an IED blast that he needed to get taken care of, and it was a good day. And then we left on the bird, and we got to Mahmudiya, and the sun was going down, and all of a sudden, the whole FOB, the battalion base, just exploded. Like everyone was running around everywhere. It was absolutely chaos. And we're trying to figure out what's going on. And they're like, some soldiers in Bravo Company are Dust One, which is basically, there was one of them that had been killed, and then there was two of them that had been taken by Al Qaeda. There was a coordinated hit. Zarqawi had been killed, I think, the month before, and so there was a power vacuum. One of his lieutenants decided to try and make a shot at the throne. So his big play was to overrun an American checkpoint. We were so undermanned that it was staffed with only 3 people, and they rolled up on it, and they overtook it, and they captured Tucker and Menchaca, and they drug them behind the vehicle, and they were being tortured to death. And we found out about it, and we tried to get on every bird, every vehicle that we could, any convoy. No one would take us. There wasn't any empty seats. And so by, I would say, 10, 11 p.m., the FOB was basically a ghost town. And we were in the transient tent together. And it was just like this shock, we had just lost another 3 guys. And deep down, we all knew how that was going to go. You don't want to give up hope, but you also know the enemy that you're fighting and what they're doing. And that's like getting captured, I think, is like the one thing. I don't think that anybody's scared of fighting. I think that a lot of people are scared of getting captured. And just the weight of that, we're there, and now the number of survivors of the platoon is even less. And so we're having this conversation that was like, can you even believe it would have ever turned out like this? And he was like, what's messed up, man? He's like, do you remember that family that got killed back in March? And I was like, no. Which family? Because it happened all the time with sectarian violence. And he was like, the one with the 2 little girls, like the 14-year-old girl and then the 3 or 4-year-old little girl, the one with the burned body. And I was like, yeah, like near checkpoint 2. And he was like, that was us, man. That was green. And I was like, what? And he went on to tell me what happened when he was tasked with investigating it. Like he went out there, he put together a patrol, and some of the guys that he picked for the patrol were ultimately involved in this, but he didn't know. He goes out there and he finds like an American shotgun shell, which was really weird. The burned body was really weird. It just seemed more like a home invasion than anything else. And when he found the shotgun shell and he had gotten back to the checkpoint closest to it, Green approached him, he told me, and said that, hey, I did this on my own. And he didn't believe him at first, but then he was able to ask him questions about the crime scene. and Green was able to answer all the questions, perfectly. And so he believed it. And so Uribe decided that the best course of action was to make him out process the Army. So he's like, you're going to go to mental health, and you're going to get out of the Army, or I'm going to put you out. And so he did. And everyone thought it was just unrelated. I mean, there was plenty of people that had snapped, and had to leave at that point. In my head, right away, it didn't make any sense. I mean, Green was an idiot in the platoon. And not only that, but at that checkpoint, there was a lot of third squad guys, like guys that I had served with personally. And the idea that one person would be able to, in a small checkpoint, take off their uniform, put on, the ninja silkies, pick up a local national weapon, exfil the wire under the cover of darkness, go to a checkpoint 200 meters away, hold a family, at gunpoint while conducting a rape, and then murder everybody and not have it. I checked my radio logs because I was the RTO. There was no shots fired reported. There was no reports of anything unusual. And I was like, there's no way that this guy was able to do that and then re-infiltrate dressed like an insurgent the same wire and nobody notices. I was like, it's impossible. I don't know, like, I remember thinking about it. I checked the logs and the rosters for that day. And I remember thinking about it from that perspective, like if I was planning a crime and I was like, those are all the morally bankrupt people. I remember Cortez requesting those people specifically, who was the senior enlisted guy at that checkpoint who committed the crimes. And I knew that there was more to it. And I was sure that it was Americans at that point, but I wasn't sure how big it was. Like I wasn't sure all of who was involved. And so I had to do some investigation after that. I was able to get a junior guy that was at the checkpoint and convince him that I knew more than I did. And then once he corroborated what I suspected and filled in the details, I knew that this was like a premeditated rape and murder, mass murder.
Thanks, Justin. And a couple of things. One, I just want to remind viewers to, as you're having questions, as you listen, please go ahead and type those into the question box. And thanks, Anne, for the comment that you posted just in talking about how betrayal, how when you do the right thing to maybe turn somebody in for crimes, there's an aspect of it that can very much feel like betrayal as you wrestle with that, because these are people who you've served with, who have had your back, etc. And what I want to do now, kind of in the story, somewhat in the interest of time, but also in the interest of what our focus is here today in terms of the justice community. And I want to fast forward through some of those sections, which are very dynamic parts of the story, where you actually start to bring this up to the chain of command, going through John Diem and then through others in the chain of command. And I want to move past that and to the point where this finally comes in front of actual investigators for CID. And Justin, I've told you this, but I've often, in listening to you tell this story and listening to just in life of how you think through things, of your ability to and you just mentioned it actually a second ago, of putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and to really try to understand what was it that they were thinking, what were they feeling at that point of time, which really in many ways is the basis of empathy. I would ask that you talk a little bit about that challenge of conducting the investigation, both through your eyes and the experience that you had in terms of trying to make people believe you, particularly the investigators, but also from their eyes in terms of what evidence package did they actually have to work off of at go at the start of this, what was going on for them, and talk through some of that conflict, if you would, and walk us through that piece of this process.
Yeah, sure. So, man, and this is why I'm so thankful for the justice profession in general. For one, I believed immediately that if I reported it, that it was just going to work out. Like I believed that they would do it. Now, this is, my ignorance. It's actually like, it didn't hit me until after I had done it, just how hopeless the case I was giving to these investigators. For one, there's I mean, 2 CID agents got sent down. That was it. That's all there was. They got sent down, and I was being interrogated by them first. Like I was the first guy that they talked to, and the battalion commander was not interested in the narrative that I was telling whatsoever. And like the line of questioning that I got first was, why do you want to get out of the Army? Like, and I started to get real scared at first. Like, I mean, real scared because it seemed pretty obvious where this was going. And once that happened, then I started to think about the position I was actually in, which is my word against 8 people, or 6 people or so that have had, months to get their story straight, that have a powerful incentive to stick to that story because of the consequences. There's no physical evidence. There's no murder weapon. The crime scene had been open to the public for months. The bodies were buried. There's no chance of exhuming them whatsoever. I mean, it wouldn't have been possible for men, let alone, to exhume a female local national body would be, I mean, it's, so there's no DNA evidence that you'd be able to get from that. I mean, it was literally, what I realized was that it was my word against theirs. And there's no CSI, you know what I mean? Like, who's gonna, like, I mean, and that's when I got really scared. I was like, where's the rest of you? You know what I mean? And not only that, but the line of the questioning, I mean, at one point it got confrontational. Like, they kept on going down this road of like, why are you making this up? Why are you making this up? And I had to fill out sworn statement after sworn statement after sworn statement. And eventually I balled it up, and I just bounced it off this guy's chest. And I was like, I told you what happened, guy. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. That's the last sworn statement I'm filling out. And I was just, it seemed obvious to me that I was going to be done. Like, I was like, no one's going to find this out. Like, my life is over. Like, I'm going to get killed. And at best, lose my career. I mean, I got advised by a mental health colonel there that I needed to get a lawyer, because there was talk of prosecuting me for a false official sworn statement. And so, I mean, I was really in a bad spot. But these guys, like, I don't know how they did it. And I, it wasn't until, like, once they proved that I was right, there was like a small moment of relief. But it wasn't until years later where I realized that, like, the fact that they took that seriously when everyone was telling them not to, the fact that they were like, we've got nothing to work with, but we're going to try, and then they cracked one of them under interview, and that was it. And then the dominoes just started falling. But like, that's, like, those guys are the only reason why I'm alive right now at all. And so, I mean, I can't imagine how challenging that would have been. I can't imagine. I mean, I didn't give them anything. I mean, in this, this is the world that they live in. There's nothing particularly special about, and these guys were both cops in the civilian world. So it's like, this is not anything unique. I mean, maybe a particularly horrible crime, but like, it's not, beyond the pale of comparison to, other stuff that they may have seen or what would come after, right? Like the next case. And so, just deeply grateful to them for just, bringing their A game every single day. So.
When I think about what justice professionals do, and just some of the more unpleasant parts of that job, and trying to both find truth and then bring criminals to justice, many times I think it's a thankless task, right? And that many of us are very ignorant of what kind of goes into it, and many times the people that are most being protected or receiving justice maybe don't even have a basis to come back and maybe say thank you or to recognize what's happened. And I wonder if you could talk just a little more about what it was like for you in those moments where the representatives of justice are interrogating you, really, right, and trying to have you say something opposite. And then maybe what that was like, but then, and you mentioned it, how kind of some of your opinions have changed over the years, and maybe like how you see it now, and then kind of tie that into just the job that justice professionals do on a daily basis, just that grind, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird experience because, like, one of the things that that you guys are kind of like tourists in our lives, and like these events that cause you to come into our lives are some of the most, formative and profound events that we might experience. But this is kind of like the subject matter that you deal with every day. And to me, it was like, I remember like how like these guys were like super just calm and quiet about everything. Like it was just like, I was like, this is, like this is like the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. And they were really calm and professional about it. I mean, I was scared. Like I kind of looked at them because like they held the power over what happened to me. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, I believed in the system enough to report it. Like you guys had that credibility from me coming in, but when I realized what I had done and how little I had given kind of these agents to work with, I became extremely scared, and then when they actually did it with nothing to work with, I mean, I was just like, wow, like they deserve every bit of the credibility that I believe that they had. And it must be, I don't know. I just don't know like how you're able to bring it to the table. I mean, as a soldier, I mean, I've got to bring my A game, a lot of the time, like when I was serving, but it's like every day, every call is like the worst moment of someone's life potentially, right? And it's just, I think that I know how I was on patrol. Like, I mean, you get complacent, you can get used to anything. Like, I mean, I remember like the first time I got hit with mortars, it was like, everyone get your gear on. And then, like you're going out there trying to, stop things falling from the sky. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't even make any sense, but like you're running for cover, and then, 30 days into the deployment, you don't even get out of bed. You're like, I mean, if it lands here, it lands here. And that's basically it. So, I mean, you can get used to anything. Anything can become normal. And how you guys, just apply that discipline every single day. Like when you're dealing with like the highest stake stuff that you can possibly be dealing with is definitely really impressive. And so like I mean, I have a lot of respect, I would say.
And if those agents happen to listen to this interview at some point, what would you want to say to them?
Just thank you. I mean, just thank you. It's, I feel like it must be like reading every chapter, but the last chapter for every case that you guys work on, because like you get to maybe get resolution but you don't get to know what it means to that person. Like if they recover, how does that story end, and living a life doing that where you don't get to read the last chapter and you're trying to sift through, the meaning that you're making and the impact that you're having, I think is probably extremely difficult. But yeah, I mean, really just thank you is what I would want to say.
Yeah. I want to shift now to some of the questions that we've had come in. And I mentioned before, we've had several come in prior to the actual webinar. And we've talked some of them already, just in terms of the sense of betrayal, and then some of the specifics about the story. But one came up, and I'm curious just your reaction to it. And the question was, please discuss moral injury and the part it plays in callous or illegal acts of soldiers in war. And the question continued, please comment on whether moral injury may be a factor in police officers' acts of brutality or violations of citizens' rights. And the asker included a concise definition. Moral injury has been described as injury to an individual's moral conscience resulting from an act of perceived moral transgression, which produces profound emotional shame, and goes on to talk about how in the context of war it can come from frankly some of the things that are pretty much part and parcel of conducting war on behalf of one's nation. And so curious, as you think about just this idea of moral injury and your experiences, what you reflect on that, both of how it impacted you, how it impacted the people around you, and then even how it impacted the folks who committed this crime.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to me that there aren't the resources. Okay, so quick answer, yes. I mean, I think that absolutely moral injury. I think absolutely exposed. I mean, this is toxic, caustic stuff, and I think that like I don't care, how hard you are. I think that when you have to sift through this subject matter every day, and you have that stress, and you have to look at the world in that way, and you see your fears about the worst parts of humanity validated every day, that's going to have an effect on you. And I can tell you that absolutely, like the environment absolutely had an effect on. I mean, like when you're having to go through and do raids day after day, you know what I mean, and use violence all the time. I mean, it mathematically worked out like we got into gunfights every other day. I mean, basically for a year, and I mean that's a lot of gunfights, and so that's a lot of violence. And when you have to have women and children cry when you kick in the door, and like none of us are bad people. You know what I mean? Like none of us want to feel that way. It has an effect, you know what I mean? Like, let alone, I mean, then there's stuff like survivor's guilt, and there's stuff like, I mean, there's decisions that you have to make that, you wrestle with, and, maybe sometimes you're wrong, I mean, there's 1,000 caustic things that affect, I think people in a line of work like yours. And I think that, it's shocking to me because like, I did it, for a year that time, a little over a year. And, this is a lot of your lives, like 20 years. And maybe the volume isn't turned up that high all the time, like, it was for this year, for me, but I mean, it is up, you know what I mean? All the time. And the cumulative effects of that, I think absolutely have an effect. And it should be something I think that we pay attention to. I wish people paid more attention to it, and I wish that there were resources. I mean, I know that some departments really have it together in regards to that, but I think that there's probably a lot of work that needs to be done on that front.
And Anne had a follow-up question in the context of moral injury, and I just wanted to address that real quick. And it's, would you say that moral injury would be a leading factor to PTSD? And from what I've read on these topics over the last months and years, is that moral injury and PTSD are two separate things, and this is still it's an emerging area of research and understanding in terms of mental health and wellness, but that there's strong overlap. And I'll see if I can find, I've seen a diagram on this that shows a very clear overlap. I'll see if I can get that to Chris and Aaron to get out to everybody. But that it's kind of like if you fell from the top of a building and you broke your arm and your lower vertebrae, right? And there's going to be things in the body, symptoms from that are seemingly could come from either of those in terms of the muscle tears, the tendons, and everything else. There's trauma to the body that, while you may have two distinctly separate injuries from the same incident, they are two separate things, but the overlap to them is pretty extreme. And that's how at least my current understanding of moral injury and PTSD is that they can occur simultaneously. There's strong overlap in terms of the feelings of guilt, shame, things that go with that, but there's a little bit of a nuance in terms of what actually is happening there to a person's soul. There's one of the leading experts who's done an incredible amount of work, particularly with Vietnam veterans, but veterans in general, Jonathan Shea, a doctor and a psychiatrist out in the Boston area, but he wrote Achilles in Vietnam was the first one, and just talking through PTSD and its effect. And then his second one that gets after moral injury even more specifically would be Odysseus in America. And I would say that anyone looking into the topics of moral injury and PTSD, that those two resources should at least at some point make it to your Kindle or your bookshelf. In terms of just kind of managing the clock as we start to wind down the hour, I want to hit one more question and then kind of see some of your takeaways. But Carla asked the question, did you have any peer support when you reported? And I know, having heard your story a number of times, this is one of the parts of your story that I think is really really powerful and really helpful to folks in terms of how we make hard decisions, of how we show courage in the face of adversity. If you could briefly talk just about some of that support that you had, whether it was there in theater or at home, or just who are the people that were kind of helping you walk through this with you?
Yeah, no. So immediately when it happened, I mean, the way I had to turn these guys in, I mean, it was basically like the battalion commander came down with the battalion sergeant major, and I was like in a room with the guy that covered it up, and I had to like stand there, at attention and, be like, yeah, this guy behind me, my team leader covered up, a multiple murder / rape. And then they left me there at that checkpoint and with that guy. And while they were driving away, a sergeant got on the phone. His name's John Diem. He's a hero of mine. And he made that battalion commander turn around. He was like, did you leave Watt out there? Or do you have Watt with you? And he's like, negative. He's like, you need to get him out of here. Like, they're going to kill him. And there was like Uribe, like we talk now, we've kind of made our peace. But he told me like that Cortez and Barker, like that there was a plot on my life at that point. And yeah, so like getting me out of there was, and with nothing to gain. He was an E5 blowing up a battalion commander spot in the infantry on battalion net, which is that it doesn't happen. And so like that, knowing that I had, DM is a huge deal. I mean, there were some people, my former squad leader, stood in my corner after the fact, after we got home. It was very, very lonely. And that kind of leads me into the takeaways. Like, I mean, I know that the subject is like, I know that this is like a fairly extreme example, and like the quality of people and the vetting that goes into the justice profession makes this stuff pretty rare. But what I would say is as takeaways, I hope this story, and if you go and you read about it, in the articles, or if you read Black Hearts, I think that some of the most powerful takeaways are, what type of person are you, or what type of leader are you when you get bad news? Two, like what can be done, from an institutional perspective to change. I mean, my situation didn't end well. Like I lost my career. I mean, there's like a number of, I have my, idiosyncrasies now. I mean, not just from the kinetic deployment, but, the stress of having to go to all these trials, you know what I mean, and testify against these people, like having people call you a traitor, just the cumulative weight of everything. I mean, I lost my marriage. All this stuff happened, but it's a situation where, I think that there's value. While you may not be put in that situation, you may know somebody that is, and like the value of being that first mover to stand with that person. Like it's easy for an institution to crush one person, and it gets more and more difficult for every other person that's willing to put their badge right next to him, or to stand right next to him and be like, no, you're not, like that person's right. And I can tell you, it is a really lonely place to be. And so I think that the understanding that you can do that, understanding that it means a lot, and kind of doing that math up front, like what kind of, I know that I'm talking to justice. I mean, you guys are impact people. You want, that's why you're in the career fields you are, but do that math up front, so that you don't have to think about it and weigh the consequences, like during the moment. It really matters. Yeah, I think that those are some key takeaways that maybe tie into justice and our experiences that we might share.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. And one of the other questions that we got previously from the survey that went out was, how are you today? And are you good with your actions? And I want to springboard off that and just say, how are you doing? Right? Like this is something that it's been over a decade, and I know that it's, even just as you described, there were some really severe impacts to you personally. But here we are, February 6th, talking to Justin Watt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. You know, and that's one of the things that I want to tell people is like, listen, like, I would love to say that when you do this, like, if you have to do this, that it's going to be okay. You know what I mean? And the truth of the matter is, it's probably not. Like, you are like, this is a bill paying situation. Like, when something like this happens, it's like, okay, like, someone's got to pay the bill. And that cost, you know, was my career. You know, I lost a marriage over it. You know, I mean, I had to go to therapy for like 2 years, like, very regularly. And then, you know, it's something that I still do to this day, and it's, you know, 13 years later. Um, it will, it will be a hard experience, like, doing it. And this is another takeaway that I wanted to say. It's like, oh, I think that you guys understand better than just about any other demographic what it would be like to have to do this, because of the close kind of camaraderie that you have with each other and the stakes that your profession, you know, kind of plays at. But I'm telling you, it only takes a few calories of effort to stand there, and say the words that need to be said, and then the rest of it's just surviving, and it's one challenge at a time, you know. But if you stay the course, and if you just, and that's the thing, I mean, I love about you guys in the profession of justice, like, all the cops. I mean, I know mostly cops. I don't have a lot of attorney friends or you know, friends that work in labs or anything like that. But you know, prison guards, you know what I mean? Like I love that. You know, like, what, like, going to work where, you know, it's like you're outnumbered and you're outgunned, and, you know, like, those types of people that want to make an impact. Yeah, I mean, you guys are special people, and I know that, you know, you want to, you know, to make a difference. And so if you're in those shoes, I know that it's difficult. You know, you can understand the camaraderie, but it doesn't take that much effort to do it. And then after that, it's just surviving. So, you know, don't be afraid of it. You know, it'll hurt. You'll lose a lot, but in the fullness of time, I can promise you that I would rather have gone through what I went through, um, than to be the guy that had to explain to my daughter, you know, if I ever, you know, had kids, you know, yeah, I helped cover up a rape and murder. And and I think that we all have a reasonable, we all want to live in a world where there's a reasonable expectation that if something bad happens to us that's out of our control, that someone's going to do something if they have the power to do it. Um, and and despite whatever I've gone through, it's I can live much, I think, easier having taken action than not. Sorry if that
was good. I appreciate it, Justin. And with that, I want to turn it back over to Chris, and any final questions or wrap up at this time. And I appreciate it.
You bet. And Jamey, Justin, what a fabulous job and such a powerful story. Thank you both for sharing so much about the story and helping all of us connect the dots on how ethics plays a part of all of our careers. So thank you so much. And folks, we will be sure to add those books to the webinar resource page after the show. Just as a reminder, Jamey will be back with Tom Dworak on February 19th for Mindset plus Habit Set equals Your Growth. You'll find links to this page as well as to so many of our other great webinars in the GoToWebinar chat area. So be sure to check those out, because we'd love to have you join us. Jamey, we do have a couple of questions that you didn't get to initially. Do you want to go ahead and take those?
Sure thing.
Okay, no problem.
One of them, and I think this is this is a really good question, and it's is there a chance those guys will ever get out of prison?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the only guy who wasn't eligible for parole killed himself in prison, and so the rest of them, I think, will. I mean, they've already come up for their first parole, and I think that, you know, it's probably eventually going to happen.
Gotcha. And then there was a question about whether this webinar would be available again, and I think like all of them through the for subscribers, it's available with all the others, and I think there may be some other ways as well. And if you have interest in that, I think reach out to either Chris or Aaron. And then one really interesting question here is that, and even as you've said, Justin, I'm sure you would do it again, but is there something that you would do differently?
I don't think so. I mean, it's like I don't like to kind of backseat, drive for myself. It's like I had a powerful incentive to try and do this the way that I thought was best in the moment. And I did it the best that I could. I don't think I would change anything. And ultimately, now, like, it's ended up well. It's like being able to go around. I mean, my story is in ADRP-1, which is like the Army's Bushido, which is like, like, what is it to be a soldier? And like, that means the world to me. And I've gotten to talk to leaders, and this book has become a resource for the Sergeant's Major Academy and West Point Cadets and the Naval Academy and the Command Staff General War College, or Command General Staff, or whatever you officers do. It's that place. And yeah, and so I wouldn't change anything. Really quickly, I would say one other takeaway that I did want to bring up that I forgot about is just like, when you look at a situation like this, I understand that there's short-term destruction to the institution. Like the institution will lose credibility in the short term, but it keeps its credibility in the long term. And like the importance of the trust. I mean, you guys have the most important job, in America, as far as I'm concerned. That trust is like what separates us from third world and what I call fifth world countries. And knowing, like even with me, like I did what I did. Because I believed, in what you guys can do. And so in the fullness of time, the public knowing that you will police yourselves up, it matters more than the short-term loss. So.
Thanks, Justin. Back to you, Chris.
No problem. And Jamey, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to present today. Clearly, everybody got a lot from your presentation. And folks, be sure to join us tomorrow when Dr. Jeff Fox is back to talk about demystifying terrorism. So be sure to join us if you can. And with that, this concludes today's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks a lot.